Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for today's Evergreen Conversation. I'm Colleen Repko, Director of Alumni Engagement here at Loyola and a member of the class of 2002. As conversations surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion have been happening at a national level, they're also taking place at Loyola. And today we will engage in a conversation related to the efforts that we're taking to support diversity, equity, and inclusion for our campus community. We've received a tremendous volume of questions from our alumni and students, so thank you to everyone who submitted those. We're going to address those shortly by our panelists. If anyone has additional questions, please feel free to submit them via the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to get to those as we go through the discussion today. First, I would like to introduce everyone. Today's panel will be moderated by Donna Woodruff, Assistant Vice President and Director of Athletics. We are also joined by our panelists, Raven Williams, Director of ALANA Services, Dr. Marianna Carlucci, Associate Professor of Psychology and Academic Affairs Diversity Fellow, Dr. Cheryl Moore-Thomas, Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for Loyola. And I should also mention that Dr. Moore-Thomas is an undergraduate and graduate alum of Loyola. And Dr. Robert Kelly, Vice President and Special Assistant to the President, and a member of the great class of 1994. I will now turn this over to Rob to start today's conversation with a reflection and prayer.
Thank you. After this moment, gracious God, through your Holy Spirit, you created unity in the midst of diversity. We acknowledge that human diversity is an expression of your expansive love for all. We confess that in our brokenness as human beings, we turn diversity into a source of alienation, injustice, oppression, and wounding. We recognize that we have not lived up to your ideals, and our values push us to learn more, challenge ourselves, and love deeply. But we are looking forward to what happens after this moment. Thank you for our students, faculty, staff, and administrators who work tirelessly to make Loyola better. We're so appreciative of our alumni who remind us of our aspirations and who partner with us. Empower us all to recognize and embrace differences as your great gift of the human family. Enable us to be architects of understanding, of respect and love. And as we combat racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Blackness, and violence, to name a few, we need you. We not only pray, but we lean upon each other for guidance, for action, and for reconciliation and justice in a diverse and changing world. Give us the strength to listen to one another, to attribute the best, and we need your guidance and all of our involvement as we work to better Loyola after this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Those are certainly wonderful words, I think, for us to kick off this panel discussion. But even before we do get started, excuse me, with answering some of the questions that were submitted, if it's okay, I would like to ask Cheryl if she would take a moment to talk just a little bit and to share the vision for equity and inclusion here at Loyola.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna. I am really honored to serve as our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. And one of the first tasks in really instituting our Office of Equity and Inclusion was to focus on our vision, given our context. I think one thing to which we can all agree is that our people, the people of Loyola, are an undeniable strength of our institution. Almost everyone has a story about a favorite professor or staff member or an administrator who was in fact been life-changing. Almost all of us have stories about friendships rooted in Loyola that have withstood the test of time, or perhaps a team or a group that serve as ever-present models of how to live our lives well and approach the complex issues that we all face. Those relationships, those are really the key of the work that we do in equity and inclusion and in the office. That's how we founded what we're doing and as we are putting forth our vision. Loyola's people are what make our institution special, and those relationships are what guide our integrated approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What that means is that the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Loyola isn't centered in one office. It is the work of all of us. It is our shared commitments and values that move through this integrated approach to get the work done. We all connect to our collective goals, and we implement those goals and apply the processes and structures within the various divisions to meet that work. Now, at the very center of that work is what I like to call our triangle of leadership. And that includes my role as Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. That includes the President's Council, which is an appointed board with expertise and special responsibilities for driving our university vision on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And most importantly, it includes the voices of our students at the graduate and undergraduate level to inform our work and to keep that work moving forward. Now, I know I've used a lot of words, I've said a whole lot, but one thing you can do for sure is to check out more information about our vision for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Loyola on the website, the DEI website, or at any time reach out to me and I'm happy to have a conversation with you about this more fully. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a great overview. And specifically, as you mentioned, our students, we can kind of start there, if you don't mind, Cheryl. And I'll throw this first question that was submitted back to you, if that is okay. So over the past few years, you know, we have seen an increase in bias reports that have been submitted by our students. Could you talk maybe a little bit about some steps that Loyola is taking to make sure that our growing population of students of color are welcomed and they're supported and included while they're here?
Thanks so much, Donna. That's a really important question. You know, there's a significant research base that talks about how feeling welcomed, how feeling as if one belongs to a community is really a key factor in student achievement and success. For the coming year, we've put in place a number of strategies to help our students feel as if they are connected and belong and to really meet the needs of our students of color and in our entire student population around issues of equity and inclusion. We're putting in place an EverFi model, which talks about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion and specific steps for anti-racism. All incoming students and all transfer students will participate in that model. Some of our alumni may be very familiar with the Messina program. We are continuing to strengthen that program through additional training and supports, which will allow us across all Messina sections to deepen the conversations around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm really excited about the work that we're doing with our Student Government Association to reestablish the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board. That board is going to be a key vehicle or tool or linkage in articulating and highlighting student needs directly to the President's Council and to me as CEIO. If you remember back when I talked about that triangle of leadership, having that process in place will really help make sure that we are constantly informed and on top of the needs of our students of color, and that as a leadership triangle, we are committed to meet those needs. I know Marianna might have some additional thoughts on this, so I'd like to turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Yeah, I think the mission here is to make sure that every single student at Loyola feels like they can flourish and that we believe in their education. So from an academic affairs perspective, we're working on a few things. One is really looking at the diversity course requirement and whether that is serving our students. And one of the things that we're really looking to intentionally do is infuse the entire curriculum with more equity and inclusion rather than sort of outsourcing it to a course that a student might take during their entire career at Loyola. So we're looking critically at the diversity requirements. We have proposals from alums actually that are really exciting and progressive. So that's one thing. The other project that I'm currently working on is looking at whether students are being advised in standardized ways. So are students of color being advised out of, say, STEM and business fields? And so we're looking at quite a large data project to look at gaps in where students of color are being advised and how students of color are being advised. Again, the mission here is to make sure that every single student, particularly our students of color, feel like they can thrive and that they're getting quality education and advising. So those are two things that we're doing at Academic Affairs and looking into for the next academic year.
Great, thank you both. Appreciate the follow-up there, Marianna. Cheryl, I'm going to come back to you if that's okay. You know, obviously in the first question, we talked a little bit about recognizing that our student population, our students of color population is growing. So as we recognize that, can you share some ways that Loyola is working to retain a diverse student body?
Yeah, this is another really important question, Donna. Thanks for raising that on behalf of our alums. You know, what we're seeing nationally and is true at Loyola is that sometimes the reasons that we aren't retaining students of color is an issue of funding. And that is a very, very important piece of what we have to consider if we're honestly committed to retaining students of color. We've been working very, very hard on this issue and are working to designate some specific scholarships for students of color. But it goes beyond those funding pieces. Those are critical. We're working on those. We've identified funds. In particular, our enrollment management team is working on how we're distributing funds and taking a look at that. But moving beyond that, as we've had conversations with many students, we understand that we can provide additional supports to students by providing some of that financial aid counseling and support and guidance to students who are currently on Loyola's campus. By being able to take a look at how we offer those support services and revising some of those methods, perhaps meeting with students on a frequent basis, perhaps monthly, to talk about how to fill out the FAFSA form, how to fill out all of those complex pieces of the financial aid process. Once they're already here at Loyola, we're learning could be a huge, huge asset for us. And so we are beginning that process and putting those resources in place. We understand the important needs that first generation students have in particular, and how important it is to address those specific retention needs. So we're putting in place a host of resources, including advising and some of those funding elements that I previously mentioned. And we're also looking at the longer term relationships that we had. You might know by now, relationships are a key piece for me. We are deepening, we are strengthening our relationships with Baltimore City Public Schools and the immediate Baltimore-Washington metropolitan area. What that does in terms of retention, we believe, is it really cements our position as an anchorage institution. It allows us to have conversations about Loyola and what Loyola can offer way before students start to have that conversation in their junior or senior year of high school. It allows us to have those conversations with families and with students that begin early in the college decision-making process, and to be seen as an asset to the community, what we can offer our students, and then continue that through graduation. So we're looking at a host of resources that really address the issues of retention. Funding is a piece of that, but there's also the counseling piece, it's the advising piece, and it's deepening the ties to our immediate community. Marianna, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that covers that. I mean, I think the only thing that I might say is, you know, there is also work being done to make the campus look more inviting and more inclusive. And I hope you've seen our banners outside of the bridge that show our commitment to the Black Lives Matters movement and to justice. And so, you know, those are seemingly small things, but go a long way in communicating safety to our students. As someone who identifies first as a first-generation college student, as a lesbian, as an immigrant to this country, it's really important that those messages are out there to make us feel safe on campus, that we have support on campus. And I think that there's some, I see a lot more traction happening in that area as well, of not only converting our campus philosophically and educationally, but also physically.
And if I could just jump back in here for a moment right there to really just highlight those comments that you previously made about curriculum. Marianna, I think those are so important when all of us can see ourselves reflected appropriately and clearly in the curriculum. That sends the message that we do belong and that we are a part of our community. So I think I would be remiss if I didn't really highlight the deep, wonderful work that you and others in academic affairs are doing in relation to our curriculum and making sure that we have a broader representation of all voices, all narratives, all stories in the work that we do.
Yeah, and I think maybe tied to some of the comments that both Cheryl and Marianna shared there, especially Cheryl, with you talking about how important relationships are. So one area, Marianna, maybe you can take this, is specific to faculty. And one of the questions that did come in was, can you talk a little bit about the steps that we are taking to provide training to faculty and staff on racism, privilege, and bias? If you could expand on that, that would be great.
Absolutely, Donna. My internet is a little unstable, so I just want to put that out there. But I have been really humbled by just how vulnerable faculty have been in speaking with me about their ideas, about growing in their education, about oppression generally, but also specifically to working on anti-racist behaviors. So I have a few things that I'd like to share with everyone. Some things are new, some things are things that we've been doing at Loyola for a while. One of the things that I'm most excited about is the Equity and Inclusion Fellows model that will be launching next year through Academic Affairs. And for those of you who are not familiar with this model, essentially it allows faculty in cohorts of 5 to 7 faculty to work on large-scale projects. And these large-scale projects are going to be around issues of equity and inclusion. The nice thing is that these faculty are compensated for their work. I'm really concerned about faculty doing work, particularly faculty of color doing this work without any compensation. So I like that this model compensates our faculty, but they will be working on projects looking at how to have difficult conversations in the classroom. So one of the things that I've heard repeatedly from faculty is, Marianna, I always get into this situation where I see an opportunity for a conversation, but I get scared and I don't say anything. And our students can find this traumatizing because there's a wasted opportunity. And so what this cohort of faculty are going to do is create a database of best practices for how to engage in these conversations, be consultants to individual faculty, departments, and divisions on how to have these conversations, and sort of gather best practices on how to do this work. So that's one project that I'm really excited about that I think faculty will see as useful. There's also this idea that racism, sexism, and homophobia isn't just happening in the classroom, but also just in the ether of our campus. It's happening in faculty meetings. It's happening on the Board of Rank and Tenure. It's happening at committee meetings. It's happening at the Starbucks line. And so one of the things that I want one of the cohorts to work on is this peer-to-peer empowerment and or intervention, where faculty can come together and talk about what are some opportunities to engage in anti-racist behavior. Not just saying, oh, I'm not contributing to it, but actually engaging in stemming anti-racist behavior when it happens in front of them and being empowered to do that on campus. And then the third cohort will work on the de-designation. There's a lot of work to do with the de-designated courses and getting that through governance, for example, and from our alums. So, give me a second. Can you still hear me? So these three large projects, each of these cohorts will engage in this work, and then they will have at least one campus-wide activity that they do. So this is really exciting for me. We also have our equity and inclusion reading groups. We are sending out that call in the next couple of weeks where people can engage in deep conversations about equity and inclusion. There's an entire teaching enhancement workshop that is being put together right now to help faculty infuse equity and inclusion in their courses, even when we can't be physically present with each other. So as we're moving a lot of our courses online or to be hybrid or high flex, how are we going to capitalize on this technology to make sure that we're not having those conversations? So we're going to have an entire teaching enhancement workshop just on that, dedicated to these anti-racist pedagogies. We also, this is Cheryl's idea to create a white accountability group. That's something that I'm working with colleagues on right now. We will launch that in the fall and spring as well. This will provide really vulnerable, emotionally rich experiences for white allies to engage again in not just non-racist behavior, but anti-racist behavior. We want everybody to be on board. Instead of ignoring comments, we want people to actually start to engage in these anti-racist behaviors. And I think the accountability group will be good for that. There's so much more, but ideally, this gives you an idea of how we're trying to give faculty the tools that they need to really engage in these behaviors and to think deeply about the work that they're doing both in the classroom, but also as agents of change around campus. Cheryl, did you want to add to that?
Oh, you did a great job covering all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. But I am going to come back to you, Cheryl, if that's okay. You know, obviously, being on a college campus, it's very important for our students that they have mentors, professors, and administrators, such as all of you, who are there in support of them and their experiences. So one question that was posed that I'm hoping you might be able to address is talking a little bit about the efforts at Loyola for increasing diversity in our faculty and for those in leadership roles at the faculty, staff, and administrator levels. If you could address that, that'd be great.
Right, thank you. Thanks for that question. We have implemented a host of inclusive hiring practices at Loyola. We use a multi-step process to really look at how we eliminate bias, disrupt cognitive shortcuts in the hiring process to move to pulling together applicant pools that are rich, that are diverse, that reflect the number of candidates, the rich pool of diversity in the candidates. So what specifically does that mean? Well, it means everything from taking a look at our job descriptions, those ads, dissecting them, making sure that we are including inclusive language in those ads, making sure that we are clearly articulating the skill sets that are needed and not putting in bias, judgmental pieces that are not relevant to the position. It means spending time on search committees or selection committees to talk about anti-racism and bias, to talk specifically, to name and identify the way that cognitive shortcuts inadvertently enter in the conversation, and holding each other accountable as a selection committee to get rid of that. It means collaboratively developing tools and rubrics that mean that we go step by step through to the standards that we're looking for in terms of hiring, and don't make snap judgments or evaluations or assessments of candidates. It means that we are committed to having diverse pools for all of our positions. And importantly, if those pools don't match national data sets that share with us the number of, and the diversity of individuals in that specific field in which we're searching, that we stop the search, we go back a step, and we talk about the pipeline and how we can recruit greater diversity into those positions. So we're doing a lot in terms of the inclusive hiring. But just as we talked a few moments ago about our students and how admitting students is one piece, but the retention piece is also a side of it, it's important in the context of this question to think about our beyond the hire strategies. A host of tools that we use to make sure that once we have successfully recruited persons of color in faculty, staff, and administrator positions, we have an environment in which those individuals can thrive and choose to stay members of the Loyola team. Those strategies look different across the institution based on position, but some of those ideas include the kinds of ways that we assign mentors and partners to talk through the professional trajectory, whether we're talking about faculty moving through the tenure track process to tenure, or whether we're talking about staff and administrator jobs, looking at moving successfully through performance reviews and assuming more and more responsibility within their job arena. We're also very, very concerned about pipeline issues and leadership and how we facilitate the development of leadership skills within the university. So we're having important conversations and putting in place tools that allow us to take a hard look at ourselves, to evaluate how we're doing in terms of diversifying leadership, and given the various aspects, putting in strategies to particularly address the leadership pipeline so that we can make sure that that leadership pipeline in fact reflects the diversity that we are recruiting to campus.
That's great. There's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done and is being done there. So I appreciate you sharing that overview for everyone. If it's okay now, I'd like to hop over to you, Raven, and talk a little bit about some feedback with the student services that might exist on campus. And one thing that was shared with us is that a lot of our Loyola students highlight 3 offices on campus as being some of the most supportive of their experiences here. So would you mind touching on how the university is supporting CCSJ, our Center for Community Service and Justice, campus ministry, and ALANA services?
Sure, Donna, thank you for that question. And it's interesting that you posed that question. This has been part of ongoing dialogue that I have had with current students and alums. And some of the concerns that have come out of those conversations is just how supported are those particular areas, and particularly through the lens of budget and staffing resources. So one of the things specifically in ALANA is I recognize while we are a small team, we are a very powerful team. We're very fortunate to have professionals and graduate assistants that bring various layers of expertise and knowledge in the areas through leadership development, multicultural programming, and retention. And so that definitely adds to the depth and breadth of the programs and services that we are able to render to our students. And with that being said, one of the things that we recognize is the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion and retention, particularly to our students of color, does not and cannot rest solely on the shoulders of ALANA, nor campus ministry, CCSJ, or one specific area. It is work that has to come through an institutional framework. And we are definitely able to do that through the strong campus partnerships that we have across campus. So through the various services and programs that we do, such as the Ignatius Scholars Program, Multicultural Awareness Program, and I know CCSJ has various initiatives through service learning and campus ministry through their various initiatives. all of that work is done through the very close rapport that we have within the different departments, within student development and friends of our division. And so that certainly adds to the richness and the enhancement that we want to provide to our students. This work around diversity, equity, inclusion, we know this is not easy work to tackle. As a matter of fact, it's very difficult work. It's very exhaustive work. And so again, those strong partnerships is how we are able to support each other within our respective departments, but also how we are able to support each other across campus. One of the other ways that I think areas such as those three that Donna identified is the support through the President's Cabinet, the President's Council for Equity and Inclusion. One of the things when I'm having conversations with, again, current students and alums is the feedback from our students and alums is so necessary and it's so imperative, because a lot of that feedback helps us to shape how we are doing and carving out our initiatives. And also a lot of times, and again, this is conversations that I have with current students, is helping them to understand how powerful that their voice is, because a lot of times those are recommendations that we can then transition up the pipeline to senior level administration and to the President's Cabinet that helps us take a better look at enhancing things around, as Cheryl mentioned, curriculum and our programming and our outreach initiatives pertaining to recruitment and retention. So I think those are certainly ways that we are supported through an institutional lens. And one of the things, since we are on this platform specifically for alums, is I definitely want to encourage alums to definitely stay connected with our respective areas. I can tell you through an ALANA lens, we are always open and receptive to have those conversations with alums. One of the things that I'm hoping to strengthen within ALANA is a mentoring component to better connect our current students with ALANA alums, because a lot of times, you know, those relationships are so important. And one of the things I tell incoming families all the time is, from the time that you step foot on campus, we are already thinking ahead well beyond your 4 years at Loyola. You know, how we can get you integrated into the workforce once you leave Loyola. And a lot of that has been helpful and instrumental through the support of our alums, being able to connect them as they are working in different industries, and also with their personal experiences that they've had in terms of navigating issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that rapport building piece is very imperative. So I would say definitely through the support of, like I said, our various administrators, I think us collaborating more with academic affairs and our alums and current students, those are ways that we are definitely supported. And then also just to address, because I've heard the concerns before about, you know, how well specifically is ALANA supported fiscally. You know, thankfully, we've been very fortunate where we do have that fiscal support. We are able to maintain and sustain a lot of our impactful retention initiatives. And as we are moving forward in the future, we have a lot of things that are planned in terms of action items to continue to keep our incoming students connected, as well as current students who may not be connected to the department. And so we definitely do have that funding support there. I think the institution has definitely shown that there is a commitment, not just to ALANA, but to all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Great, and all of that is so good to hear. One follow-up question that just came in is, could you just expand, are all students of color connected to ALANA services?
So the reality is, while we would love for all ALANA students to be connected to the office, there are some students that are not. Out of our total population, close to half of the ALANA students are connected to the office. And we know that we have some opportunities to reach out and to engage the students that may not necessarily be connected to ALANA services. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Some just may not have the familiarity with the department. We also recognize that for some students, especially for incoming students, students are in different places within their identity development process. And so one of the things that I think we have a commitment to do as a department is just to make sure that we are providing the effective and impactful outreach efforts as much as we can so that we can connect with as many students as possible. And again, we can do that through a variety of ways, whether it's connecting with our incoming students through, again, ISP and our MAP programs, but also we recognize that there are some students that may not connect with us until their senior year. And with that being said, we would never turn any student away. It's never too late to connect with our area. So again, we just have a commitment to reach students across the board and contingent on where they are. And some of that takes us going and meeting students where they are as well too. So we can't always just take that for granted and have the luxury of just being in our space and expecting students to come to us. Sometimes we have to come to them. I'm mindful that we're also in a very unique space right now in the midst of COVID, and with things changing virtually, and then us trying to plan through a hybrid lens where we're going to be able to do some things in person, some things are going to have to be virtual. So that is, again, where we're going to have to be strategic in our commitment to reaching out to all of our students. But I want to be very clear that we do have a commitment to service all of our students that are at Loyola. And so again, we will do that whether students come to us or we go out and meet them where they are. The last piece I'll tag on to that also is that the rapport building piece, which is so critical. And I think that's why when students come and connect with us, we want to do what we can to connect with our current students and keep the connection with our alums, because oftentimes we've been able to connect with students who may not oftentimes frequent our office through those current students and alums who have built a rapport with us. And where we may not have been able to capture them right away, they may have heard a story through a current student or alum that said, this is what, you know, I got out of ALANA services. This is how they were able to help us. This is why you should connect with them. So I just wanted to stress how critical that rapport building piece is with our outreach efforts as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's some good insight there for sure. I'm going to switch over to Rob. Dr. Kelly, obviously you have a good perspective, having been a student athlete that comes out. Yeah, you were a student athlete, you know, here, and then obviously coming back in a leadership role. So here's a question that can talk a little bit, addresses a little bit about the nexus between alumni and our students. So if you could, what are the specific ways the university supports students of color in their academic and professional growth, and how might alumni be a part of that process?
Yeah. So I'm going to just kind of step back a little bit from that in terms of how I answer this question. But, you know, so much of this is connected. When I was a student at Loyola, our population of students of color in particular was around 6%. Was around 6% of the student body, and it stayed pretty much between 6 and 8% over a number of years. And I think when we hit about the year 2000, and I had become a trustee of the institution in 2004. But I remember conversations that many of the trustees were having around, if we want to really make Loyola relevant and be the institution that we want to be, we need to change the structural diversity of the institution, that needed to change as well. And so a decision was made to really figure out how can we increase the structural diversity, purely the numbers of the students who'd be showing up at the institution. And as that began to happen, it brought to light other issues. You know, the historical vestiges of being included and being excluded. Was programming happening that really worked for all students? The way we advise students, the kind of the pipelines, the mentors and role models that you might see in faculty and staff positions. So the institution made specific changes to increase those areas as well, in terms of the ways in which the structural diversity was being met with a real acknowledgement and naming of the ways in which we have not been able to be as effective in the past. But those are just two areas. The other two that have really changed over the years that really speak to the support of students, both academically and professionally, is, you know, behaviorally, what are people doing on campus? What are the traditions that we have. And you saw more support being put into certain traditions that supported our students of color or students or even white allies who thought about these issues and cared about these issues, how we're engaging in the city of Baltimore, the ways we're learning about issues of service and justice. So again, that coming together. And then I probably the last part is just the psychological dimension. How does it feel to be on campus? How does it feel for every individual, be it student, faculty, staff member, when you illustrate or exhibit an area of difference, how does it feel for you to be on campus? And so all of this is connected. What I'm really excited about is that because our students and our alums have really been calling us to say, gosh, I really want you to live up to the aspirations that you talk about, we've created kind of an alumni advisory board around the issue of diversity. And so the ways in which our alumni can lay their hands on resources to make the student experience better is going to be really important. You know, we want all of our, we think we're preparing people to learn, lead, and serve in a diverse and changing world. And what's important about that is that there's process, there's reflection, and there's discernment as we go throughout making changes. We want to implement changes at the institution that are going to endure. They're going to last a lifetime. We don't want to forget what happened, but we want to make so we don't repeat challenges of the past. We want to always remember that. But it's really important that our alumni get involved in this advisory board so that, and it's across the board, every kind of difference, learning disabilities, sexual orientation, every kind of difference that adds to the diversity of our alumni, our community, but also enhances the experience for students. We won't be able to do it unless we have living examples of our Loyola education out there reminding us and helping us on how to do this better. So, and I know lots of questions are coming in, so I want to make sure I cut that off.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal, especially making that connection between who has come before and where we're headed now. So appreciate that. I would like to go back and just touch a little bit. Obviously, when issues do come up, we talked a little bit about the bias reporting system, so that exists at Loyola. So if it's okay, Cheryl, I'd like to ask you a little bit about that. That's obviously a means for our students to express their concerns should they arise. So can you touch on any plans in that area regarding updating or enhancing the system that already exists?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be glad to. This is an area which.
Sorry, you unmuted.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. This is an area we have been working on very, very intently over the past several weeks. And I'm very, very pleased with the progress that we have made in this area after listening to your voices and concerns, after listening to the voices and concerns of some of our undergraduates and our faculty who have stood in support of our students, our faculty, staff, and administrators who've raised those concerns in support of our students. And there are some substantive changes that are important that I would like to share with you today. Some of you may remember the PCB, the Peer Conduct Board. As we've really studied this issue, we have determined that that board is an important key to infuse student voice in the process of the bias reporting system. Now, we've got to make some significant changes to that. Those include expanding the board to include more students, more diverse students, and also including in that process extensive training on anti-racism, how to recognize bias, inclusion, and equity. I'm really excited because I'm going to have the opportunity to partner with my colleagues in student development and specifically with Raven to consult on preparing that work, but it is going to be extensive training and ongoing. You may remember that the PCB has an extensive bulk of training at the beginning of their experience, but that they meet frequently throughout the year and there's ongoing support. We believe those tools and these resources are going to equip our students to be a part of that process and to share and amplify the voices of students in an appropriate manner as they move through that process. We also know that transparency is important. You've heard over and over and over again from students and from you that knowing what happens once the bias process starts, what doesn't happen, and where we land at the end of any given period is really important. So in order to address that, we're going to make some changes to our website so that it's updated and includes exactly what those processes are, lays those processes out, identifies them as a formal process and an informal process so that students, once they have received the support and advocacy and advising that they need in order to make decisions, they can determine for themselves whether they want to move through the formal or informal process. It will also be the responsibility of the President's Council and the Office of Equity and Inclusion, my office, to publish the data on those reports. Of course, we will make sure safeguards are in place for confidentiality, but we will be accountable to you to let you know the number of cases that we've received and the general outcome of those cases so that we're making sure that we are transparent and clear in all of our communication. We've talked about the importance of having individual clear responses and consequences for acts of racism, but we also talked about the need and the ability to address those systemic issues that need intervention across campus. This is the beauty, I believe, of those processes that I talked about, where the President's Council, the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and the student leadership boards can work together to talk about what kind of campus-wide interventions do we need to put in place to begin to address some of the systemic issues. As has been mentioned and highlighted in the Q&A board, we know that a one-time hit training is not going to do it, but as we are sincere in our efforts to change culture and shift culture and look at policies and practices that are sustaining racist, inequitable, biased practices in place, and we're willing to dismantle those, that's where this deeper work aligned with restorative justice practices that the council, the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and the student boards, in looking at the data and the outcomes from what's going on in the bias reporting process, can design those tools and those steps to move our campus forward.
That's great. Thank you. I think that definitely addresses the question. If it's okay, we do have a question that came in now, and actually I'll open up to any of our panelists who would like to address this one. You know, we have talked a lot about racial diversity specifically during this, but could anybody address what we might be doing as an institution when it comes to LGBTQ, learning differences, and physical differences that may exist among our population?
I will start off certainly with that. One of the major tasks of the Office of Equity and Inclusion in our inaugural year is to develop a strategic plan. Within that strategic plan, we have 3 key areas. One of those areas is around inclusion and accessibility. It is absolutely important that we understand diversity broadly and that we are consistently working toward measures of inclusion and accessibility. For that reason, the President's Council is designing measurable outcomes in that area that will hold our institution accountable and that we can benchmark our progress as we've worked across the institution to look at what those accessibility matters and issues may be. So, for example, Donna, it'll be everything from making sure that our classroom materials and approaches are accessible for all learners, to making sure that we're appropriately funding and providing resources for members of our LGBTQ+ community, to make sure that we are in fact meeting our community members developmentally where they are in terms of their understanding of their intersecting social identities. So that area of the strategic plan that deals with inclusion and accessibility is the piece that highlights and recognizes and holds us accountable as an institution for making significant gains in those areas.
Thank you. Thank you for expanding on that. And I'm certain that unfortunately we will not be able to get to all of the questions that are coming in, but certainly glad to see that there are so many people that are participating in this and and want to share their thoughts with us. So one final question, before we wrap up is for you, Rob. As we have all been affected these past few months, clearly by the COVID-19 pandemic, can you share how you have seen our students of color specifically affected during this time?
Yeah, thank you, Donna. So all of our students across the institution have been affected in really big ways with the pandemic that's going on right now. But specifically for many of our students of color, the digital divide is significant and real. And so while each of us may say, okay, well, we're dealing with all these issues where we're separated and isolated from one another, and we're trying to remain on top of schoolwork and then even being connected, but Wi-Fi is different in different locations, and the ability to kind of connect. And what we've seen is whether it's students' lives when they're on campus and how they connect back with their home lives, their families, the responsibility that each of us have once we go back to our personal families. It's different across the board. And when you look at many of our students of color, some of them are, helping out with younger siblings or older siblings, or trying to figure out in ways in which they can work. Also dealing with healthcare issues and disparities around how we're dealing with the healthcare issues as it relates to COVID or other things during this time. And then I would say for many of our students of color, it's exacerbated when you think about the racism and violence that we've seen against and anti-Blackness against many communities of color. That's also been a really big toll. And I know that many of the faculty, staff, and administrators of color on campus, we've been talking about it, and it's this extra burden that we kind of carry with us when we come to work and work. And I just know that so many of our students are dealing with that when they were also dealing with coursework, trying to figure out what the fall is going to look like, and maintaining some level of balance in their lives now, let alone what it's going to look like once they get back to school in the fall. So that's just kind of a quick answer, and I know Marianna might have something to share as well.
Rob, I just wanted to say the digital divide is so important, and I wanted our alums to know that we were able to furnish a laptop, hotspot, camera, or microphone to every single student. We overnighted laptops all over the country to make sure that our students could get online and get that education. It's not about having the latest and greatest gadget. It's about making sure that every single student at Loyola can get on Zoom to talk to their professor, can get on Moodle to learn, and can take and be empowered to educate themselves without embarrassment or shame about not having accessibility. And we're doing this into the fall as well. So we're going to start a new batch of, okay, if you need a computer, if you need anything to learn in the fall, let us know and we will provide it. And that's not something that I think every university can do, but I was really impressed with our response to students who needed those tools to really be able to learn.
That is great. Thank you. And thank you, all of us. Thank you, Rob and Marianna, for answering that, Raven and Cheryl for being a part of this. Obviously, Colleen for helping to organize through our alumni association, because obviously all of your insight and willingness to share some of what is going on at Loyola is awesome, and we certainly appreciate that. But before we do end, I would like to ask Cheryl if you wouldn't mind sharing some closing comments, on this very important topic for all of us, as members of the greater Loyola community.
Thanks so much. And I'd certainly like to thank each and every one of you for participating, for sharing your questions, for sharing your stories and your hopes and your dreams for Loyola. I started out talking about how relationships are so much a part of Loyola University, Maryland, how relationships define who we are. That really is that special piece, that distinctive part of Loyola. What I hope to make very, very clear in these closing moments, that I know that is shared by all of us who've participated today, is that you matter. We need you, your voices, your articulation of the hopes and dreams, your calls for accountability, your charge, your challenge. We need you to be a part of helping us live our mission more fully. This has been a very, very difficult moment in our nation's history. It's been a difficult moment for us at Loyola as we are facing the reality that we have not fully lived up to all that we know we're called to be. But what I do know as an educator, and what all of us on this webinar share, is our belief, our clear expectation that we have to do better, and that we know that there's no way that we can do better unless we work together. So we are so appreciative of all that you have done to share your stories, your conversations, your hopes, your dreams, your questions. We appreciate the willingness with which you stepped forward to collaborate and to partner with us. We welcome that and look forward to more of that. And what we also hold in this moment is that we've got to hold space for each other to grow and to learn, to make mistakes, but to move past that for a greater, stronger Loyola. We so believe in our mission, and we know that we are called to lean into that mission, to work for and with others, particularly around these issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I welcome your comments and your feedback at any time. I look forward to working very, very closely with the exciting board that is forming. And I also welcome the opportunity to hear from you individually. If you email, reach out, we can set up a time to talk further about these issues. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you to Rob, Donna, Raven, and Marianna. Thanks everyone for joining us today and for participating in this conversation and helping to push Loyola forward. This conversation will be posted to the Alumni Association website shortly. So if anyone didn't get to see the whole thing, it will be up there. I also want to mention that if anyone is interested in being involved in the Alumni Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board, please email the Alumni Office at alumni@loyola.edu. If you're not interested in the board and you just want to have a conversation or share your experience, please go ahead and do so. We're having conversations with a lot of alums right now and certainly interested in having more. And then please stay tuned to the alumni newsletter and the Alumni Association website for future events and more updates as we make progress in this area. All right, thanks everybody and stay well.
Thank you.
Bye.